Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Apolla's Odyssey. I'm your host, Apolla Asteria, and I am back from a short little break. I was feeling a little under the weather after the Conscious Life Expo, unfortunately, and I believe I took a break before the Conscious Life Expo the other weekend, just to prepare for, the expo. But I am feeling much better now, so I have this amazing interview scheduled with Leo Zagami tonight. I'm still waiting for him to come in the studio, so hope everything's okay on his end. But okay, he's coming in now. Awesome. So yeah, the Conscious Life Expo was a really great weekend. I sold a lot of my spears, and by the way, if you want to help support my show and help me out, because tonight's show is actually about the entertainment industry and occultism in the entertainment industry. And something I think we'll probably get into tonight is the fact that a lot of us in Hollywood that don't have the job have been unable to work this whole time since the mandates have been passed. So if you want to help support me, because I can't work in the entertainment industry anymore at the moment, please go check out my spears, which are on shamanspears.com. And I will pull those up right here. Shamanspears.com. I have the latest collection, the ultraviolet collection, which is all kind of themed off ultraviolet light. I sold a lot of spears at the last conference. And they went over really well. I think this is my greatest collection yet. Most of the ends of them are actually made with quartz grown in titanium, and they are filled with copper coils, crystals, magnets, and sand I collect from sacred places around the world. So they are definitely very powerful for amplifying and channeling energy. So please go check those out at shamanspears.com. All right, so tonight's show, I am going to be bringing on Leo Zagami. I'm sure a lot of you probably know of his story or heard of him, and I'm really excited to have him back on. I believe this is the third or fourth time I've had him on my show now. And so we're going to be getting into occultism in the entertainment industry, which is a topic that I definitely have a lot to say on. I've experienced a lot myself. So let's see what Leo has to say and bring him on. Hey, Leo, how are you doing? Long time no see.
It's always a pleasure. And of course, we are here in the midst of incredible weather that makes it not always easy to communicate, but we made it.
Is it snowing down there in Palm Springs right now?
Almost. We don't know. At 8 o'clock, we should start with the rain, but it's rather cold, so we don't know. Definitely it's going to be snowing where you are, I'm sure.
Really? In the Hollywood Hills?
It seems like it's really cold. There's a blizzard that supposedly should arrive on LA later on, so we don't know.
Yeah, what is going on with this weather lately? I mean, even on the other side of the country, my family is in the Midwest, and I'm almost wondering if the pole shift is starting to take place.
Well, it was even confirmed by CNN recently, which is, of course, the super fake media, but they said that the nucleus at the center of the Earth has stopped a few years ago. That was confirmed. And also we have a lot of volcanic activity, a lot of earthquake activity, and the volcanic activity, of course, influences the change in the weather.
Wow. Yeah. It's, I heard that actually the pole is moving a mile a year or something like that in Russia. Someone was telling me a while back. So
But definitely
very
something is
interesting.
moving, because after the last few earthquakes in Turkey, there is really literally the earth with a divide and a big, it's like worse than Sant Andreas Fault. I mean, it's
Yeah.
definitely a situation in which we are reaching gradually the end time scenario, both in the geopolitical as well as the spiritual, as well as in the physical, in the magnetic fields of Earth, because as we are going towards this manifestation, which is unprecedented, which will see the rebalancing of forces, I think that is what we are viewing now. So during the chaos, it's a little bit like in 1862, Eliphas Levi wrote, or 1861, I think Eliphas Levi wrote to Baron Spedalieri that towards in the next few decades, and of course a century at that point, there will be gradual manifestation of the spirits going more and more around. And that also is viewed with the Portuguese phenomena, which is part of it also with this. But we all emanate magnetic fields. And of course, what better subject really to introduce also Hollywood, which is itself magnetically driven. The wheels of the films, when it all started, were of course something.
Oh, that's right. It was there's magnets in the cameras, right?
Sure. And we have to go back in time to find the discovery that was revolutionary, of course, of the gramophone. But all that was done because they were actually searching for communications with the spirits. So, it was a kind of like we got the cathodic tubes that were used for TV by somebody who was involved with the Golden Dawn. There is a lot, of course, of links between the occult and show business. But as you might know, my book is also about the military-industrial complex and show business, about everything that surrounds this great illusion propaganda machine called Hollywood, right from the very start, because my book starts from 1909, 1910, when there was only a dirt road in Hollywood, and when D.W. Griffith, who later on found United Artists with Charlie Chaplin, will have created the first film, which is actually been then discovered many decades after, because it was a lost film. It was called, I think, Once Upon a Time in California, or something like that. It was an old movie, and
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
No.
There was a previous. Oh wow! I was like, wow, there's been 2 remakes.
Well, actually, you cited a movie that, of course, picks up on a lot of stuff. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah, the connection with who? Why can't I think of his name right now?
Charles Manson.
Yes, yeah. He's actually, that house where a lot of that took place in the Hollywood Hills is actually right near my house here in the hills. So.
Yeah, well, the thing is that I discuss all this in my book, but I like I said, I start from the very beginning, because it's important to understand there is a connection between Charles Manson and what happened at the end of the 60s and what happened instead right at the beginning. Because people think, Hollywood, it's all great stuff. It's Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, all these people with Griffin found in the studio and involving themselves in a revolutionary act, which was making films. It wasn't really like that. It was very carefully orchestrated behind the scenes. And now it's actually a little bit of this truth is being brought out in this recent movie, Babylon, which I actually talk about, even if this book came out actually in December. Because
I haven't seen that yet. I've been excited to see that.
Well, it is a portrait, a fictional portrait, of course, of what I partly written here in my book, because it's a period that was well described by another author, which I had the pleasure to know many years ago. And of course, when I was involved with the OTO, which is Kenneth Anger, who wrote Hollywood Babylon 1 and 2. And in fact, I discuss also Kenneth Anger and his relevance in the Hollywood underground scene, and not only the Hollywood underground scene, because his films are almost rituals. And let's not forget that this ritual is arriving all the way to the White House with people like Lady Gaga, who use the music of Bobby Beausoleil for her documentary on Netflix. People don't know that, but the music that Lady Gaga used was from Lucifer Rising, music recorded in jail from Bobby Beausoleil, who was one of the Charles Manson family who went around the hills murdering people, who actually murdered the guitarist that Charles Manson had, I think, tortured a little bit, and then he finished the job because, as you know, Charles Manson never really physically, apparently, killed anybody. He always delegated other people. He was rather a coward in that, but he was a manipulative mind controller, and, of course, linked to a whole milieu of secret societies, Church of Satan. Bobby Beausoleil was acting in the first version of Lucifer Rising. I talk about it in my book, and together with this film ended up being buried in the middle of Death Valley, like I tell in my book. And suddenly they buried this copy of the movie because Bobby Beausoleil was homosexual. He had a kind of a gay kind of fight with Kenneth Anger, maybe a little bit overly dramatic, picked up the only wheel of this movie that was being filmed, and it was actually being filmed in San Francisco in the old Russian embassy, picked up, and it was a ritual. There was Kenneth Anger, there was Anton LaVey, the music was made by Mick Jagger, and it was pretty wild, the whole thing. So he went to the desert, he buried this movie, was never found again. A few fragments survived.
You said this was the first movie that was ever filmed, or one of the first movies ever filmed in Hollywood?
This is a long time after. We kind of like change
we're
W. Griffith. Because you were mentioning Charles Manson, so I wanted to just tell you that it actually goes back all the way back. Because let's go back to where we started, which was D.W. Griffith and his, of course, revolutionary filmmaking. Because he started with a first film he found Hollywood was just a little community, a dirt road, which for many years stayed a dirt road, Hollywood Boulevard.
What was Death Road?
A dirt
Hollywood
road.
Boulevard was originally called Death Road?
No, it's a dirt road. It was like just
a dirt road. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I thought you said Death Road.
English is not always available. But what I can tell you is this, that he arrived there. 1909 was a very particular moment in human history, because at that time, Aleister Crowley had actually gone to North Africa with a guy called Victor Neuburg, and they had opened the gates of hell in Algeria, in Northern Africa, in a ritual which was known as the Coronzo ritual, to evoke the demon of the abyss. Now, what happened later was that in 1910, they, of course, followed up with another ritual. But in the meantime, this diabolic synchronicity wanted that D.W. Griffith laid the foundation of Hollywood, because after that movie that wasn't really talked much about, what happened was he goes back and films what would become one of the most influential movies of all time, which was dedicated to the KKK. Birth of a Nation was the first film ever screened at the White House. It was a film that he filmed, of course, in Hollywood with the help of the military-industrial complex. The first time the military-industrial complex provided tanks for a movie. And they started this link that will continue, and that in the 1930s brought to the opening of an office which still exists in Hollywood, a Pentagon office with a representative. And in my book, I actually tell the name of the latest representative. I show a photo of inside the office and all these films that they have manipulated with the military-industrial complex. But aside from the military-industrial complex, D.W. Griffith, this filmmaker, was actually also a Freemason. So they started opening also a lodge that could take on board all these young actors, directors, but also especially what will become later the movie industry. And so the Warner Brothers of the situation, the people who will produce and give the money for all this. And in this Hollywood situation, of course, we start with this Birth of a Nation, you understand, we are going completely the opposite. After 100 years, we have instead Walt Disney wanting to push black people against white people. So we have the complete opposite.
You know, the agendas in Hollywood are just, it's so ridiculous. I mean, I've been on, you know, normally I'm on shows every single day before these mandates passed. I was working on different TV series like every single day, like 16-hour days on set. And it was like, every single show is so obvious what kind of message they're trying to push. It's like so obvious that it is almost like mind control programming, or it is mind control programming. And, you know, there's all these agendas that they want to have pushed in every single show, you know, just the way that they do it, the way they go about everything. It's so obvious.
Well, in fact, I have mentioned you, as you know, in my book, because with your message to Hollywood during the pandemic, you actually gave an example of somebody who prefers to make a drastic choice rather than continue in a compromise. So for that reason, I cited you, and I cited you in a context in which I also showed the hypocrisy of people like Newsom, who instead published even an open letter inviting all the major film companies to come back to California because here films are made in a better way, after he's making it impossible for people to actually even work here with his ways. So I definitely think that it's important that people realize that this book is based on facts. There's over 1,000 sources, academic citations are always provided from credible sources, newspapers, things, but always asserted that there is, of course, a confirmation of everything that is said. Because when we go into the history of Hollywood, then 1916 is the year in which, after the criticism for Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffith produces the movie which will actually bring the set of Babylon and 10,000 actors for the film Intolerance. This film will open a new era in Hollywood, and this film will basically open a new era in Hollywood for the simple reason that there is various historical periods, but this Babylonian period, of course, of the whole plot, because it's one of those kind of dramas where you go from one historical part to the next one. But you have to understand that at that time, Hollywood didn't really exist. So on this, like I said, third road, there was left only this big scenography at one point after the movie was filmed of Babylon with the elephants of Ishtar, with the gates, with all the symbols of Enki.
It's the Anunnaki, the winged.
What you have after now,
it's right down here at Hollywood and Highland, and right near me right now.
Yeah, that is the reconstruction that was made in 2001 for what is the Ovation Center, based on the original scenography that was done by D.W. Griffith, and on the other side of the road from where now is the Jimmy Kimmel Show, which is basically the Masonic temple that used to be back then. So,
the Jimmy Kimmel Show is the Masonic temple?
Well, or where that's at? Of the road from the Ovation Center, you have, I think, where they filmed Jimmy Kimmel, if I don't get it wrong, the Masonic temple. That used to be a Masonic temple. I don't think they use it any longer.
No way.
But there is also another important Masonic temple, which I talk about in my book, is the North Hollywood Masonic Temple, which is also very influential because in that place you had some of the biggest producers. The North Hollywood Masonic Lodge was once considered by the profane world to be the seat of the occult of Hollywood, and it still exists now, and it's North Hollywood Lodge number 542. And in that lodge, there were people like Clark Gable, John Wayne, Warner Brothers, Laurel and Hardy, all the famous Masons that they say, were part of the great stardom of Hollywood. They actually were in that lodge rather than in Hollywood, because, as you know, it's not really Hollywood. Northern Hollywood is on another side of the hill. So we are, though, basing our book on facts. And the facts are these. When in 1916 he left that Babylonian scene, that's where the whole film that now is coming out is based on, this idea, no? But imagine the fact that they didn't have any technology for the graphics or anything. So they had to make everything by hand, by craftsmen. So it gave a lot of jobs to a lot of people. And there were 10,000 actors. You see the scene. I mean, people can now go and see this movie. It's. I think you can find it on. If you want, I can give you a link. I can find it, but it's easily you can find it on YouTube, and you see the same scenery that you see now in Hollywood because it was reconstructed in 2001. And the story that behind the reconstruction and the launch in November 2001 is also a very particular one, which I tell in my book. 10 years earlier, Kenneth Anger had made a documentary dedicated to Hollywood Babylon with the BBC. And he actually started the documentary, which you can find also. I put a lot of these things on my channel, if I can, with, of course, without the using what is the fair law use for this stuff. And this documentary is a very interesting one because it shows how D.W. Griffith and his movie were very, very influential for the very establishment of Hollywood. And then it started and triggered all the decadence of the 1920s because Crowley at that point commented on Hollywood. And you know what Crowley said? He said, these people, they are a bunch of cocaine-indulging, crazy lunatics doing orgies everywhere. Well, that seems like an ideal scenario no, for Crowley. In fact, Crowley at that point established between the 1920s and 30s a very powerful and influential lodge where they, with the naked woman on the altar, had the first Gnostic mass of all times. So,
and that's the one Jack Parsons became a part of
later on. Later
JPL.
On. Yes, later on, then you have Parsons, and of course, people can go and what was this that TV series that went on for a couple of
Strange Angel. I just started watching it. That's why I brought that up, or I just watched the two series.
It's very useful.
It's incredible.
It gives you the idea. I think that the film that just came out, the one from, I think it's the director of La La Land, that Babylon with Brad Pitt, gives you the idea of the decadence, the indulgence, the drugs, the fact that either you make it or you die almost in Hollywood, but it's a corruption system. It's a system built on corruption and on blackmail, on drugs, on all kinds of things. And this is, I think, very clear in Babylon because people who saw it, who came out of the cinema, actually, I spoke with some of them, they were shocked also by the effects they use with the music, the way they mix the music and the visuals. If you are somebody who has some problems with stroboscopic lights, I guess you will risk a seizure because it's really... I heard about it as a bombardment. So that is...
that sounds like MK Ultra, kind of, when they use the different flashes of lights. And
yes, but that starts from the very history of cinema, from the very start. In fact, my book then goes into the next part, which is Walt Disney, which is the first cartoon, but also the first time they use basically stereophonic sound in the cinema, the way they create this ritual, no, which then becomes a ritual. The popcorn, you go and eat it in front of a film. It's almost a ritual that you have to persevere as you're going into this to the cinema to see your movie. And then, of course, we have in my book the transformation of Hollywood, which was, of course, launching the American dream after the war with rather conservative values into the gradual transformation in something else. That happened between the 50s and the 70s. And I explain in my book this alchemical operation to transform Hollywood, which was done with LSD, tons of LSD, with the CIA agent coming, a guy who kind of, it was called Hubbard. It wasn't a Hubbard from Scientology, it was another Hubbard. He was an agent that could give LSD to all the various psychiatrists. And then, of course, at that point, they started experiments. Actors from back then got very much involved with it.
And that was all like the Doors, Jim Morrison, everyone that was like living on Laurel Canyon at that time was all kind of from military families and a part of that, all the major rock stars.
Yes, there was a lot of military involvement in that. Yes, and then you mentioned, of course, Jim Morrison, whose father was involved in the military industrial complex. But that's why I explained then in this book how the Rockefeller Foundation, the military industrial complex, have really built up this whole system. So the big companies that you have, MGM and all the others, they're all built within the frames of certain lodges with certain people. Otherwise, certain big families like the Rockefeller Foundation that invested a lot in radio activity. Radio became something that you could use for propaganda tools after it was already used into the war for communication from Marconi's invention onwards. But then after you have, of course, the way Orson Welles used it when he, with War of the Worlds, scared the heck out of everybody. People are like throwing themselves.
Hey, we're kind of experiencing that in a real life scenario now with these UFOs being shot down.
I think
being broadcasted UFOs.
UFOs. I think what's happening now is, of course, we are getting towards a scenario of no return when you start using nukes, and that is probably going to happen within this year. So within this year, the moment you start using nukes, we have always seen this correlation between UFOs and nuclear bases, nuclear launch pads and stuff, and the fact they often intervene, or they were even stopping the missiles from the launch pad, creating problems, security problems and whatnot. So there was always that. Regarding the latest UFOs, we have seen, of course, the hobby club. We have seen the Chinese that are, of course, interested in spying, but it seems like Biden just let them have all the spying they want. Let's not forget one thing: the Chinese are very powerful. Even in Hollywood at the moment, they are very influential. So it's going to be very difficult if now we are entering in a war with the Sino-Russian New World Order, because the meetings that were held recently in Moscow between Wang Yi and Vladimir Putin just confirm that the West is not really understanding this great alliance. I spoke about in Volume 7, as you know, of my confessions. I warned about what will happen before the war even started in Ukraine. And of course, it's only a matter of time. We have an enlargement of this war, which will include, of course, Taiwan, as the Chinese are continuing to build artificial islands, embedding other people's sovereignty, not really caring, because they want to become the driving force of Asia, of the Pacific. I think that the problem here is that, of course, Hollywood used to be a reflection of American only propaganda. We started letting other people from other countries take over the show. The Russians arrived in the 90s, but also the Chinese later on, even much more aggressive.
And they buy, do you know the percentage of like the amount of the studios that they own? The Chinese, like it's a very large percentage, right?
Well, they own a lot. They are even capable these days of influencing even Walt Disney with the choice of specific, Chinese figures, or like nowadays in this New World Order scenario. We see that, of course, everything has to reflect the woke ideology, which is dictated by Davos. The Chinese are part of it, even, if people might think maybe the Chinese are no, but they're all part of this big club in which they are brainwashing people. So Hollywood, really, the future of Hollywood is these days decided more than ever in Davos at the World Economic Forum. Having said that, the son of Klaus Schwab, like I explained in Volume 7 of my confession, has his main office in Beijing and in China. So just so you know, it seems like, it's difficult to say what's going to happen next, but we can say that, of course, with similar influence in the show business, you have basically compromised a tool that was influencing American society in a positive way, aside from in a negative way at times. When I said the transformation that happened in Hollywood, we went from the John Wayne, Charlton Heston characters, the alpha male, into something that now is completely a reflection of the times, because the woke ideology is pushed constantly as the main ideology that people need to.
And this is what I was talking about when I was saying it's so obvious the agendas they're pushing on set. And I don't want to like, I think I know, what I'm talking about when I say this, like what you were just mentioning. It's like those agendas, it's very clear how hard they're pushing them in every show. Yeah. It's like, it's like every show, it's like we need this kind of person, this kind of person.
Where you have the celebration of it all and flames and horns and
yeah.
We need to be more.
It's in everything. The symbolism. Even have you seen Wednesday Addams, like the occult symbolism in Wednesday Addams?
No.
The new series. It's crazy because it's a kids show and it's like there's so much symbolism in it. It's incredible how much.
I remember there was this Santa Claus thing in that Walt Disney brought out in December, where Satan was kind of homaged by a group of children that were showing, we love you, Satan, kind of openly. Now, I explained how Walt Disney started. Walt Disney started in a very different way. I mean, started a very different way with Walt Disney being a fervent anti-communist. The period, of course, the end of the 40s was characterized in the beginning of the 50s by the Red Scare, the McCarthy era. Now, we can say a lot of things. A lot of people say, that was a negative thing to do. But in reality, they were trying to defend American interests. And when it comes to people like Charlie Chaplin, the co-founder with D.W. Griffith of the United Artists, he was actually a pedophile. And, people these days homage and think about Charlie Chaplin with his speech, The Dictator, and all the propaganda that emanated against Hitler in that speech. And they're ready to forgive everything to this guy. But Charlie Chaplin was a pedophile. He went with 14-year-old boys in Hollywood. Wow. So it's a little bit. And then you have the fact that, of course, he comes from the Sabbatean Frankist background. The Sabbatean Frankists had heresy that was born within Judaism with Sabbatai Zevi and later on with Jacob Frank. And it became the driving force of all the Jewish people who went to Hollywood and who are mostly reformed Jewish people. They're not really orthodox in anything. They might go to Reform synagogue, because what's happening is that gradually from Rothschilds, the period in which the Rothschild got in business and made, of course, occult alliances with the Sabbatean Frankists, in certain lodges, also Freemasonry of the Illuminati. And then they created in Frankfurt a school called the Frankfurt School. Now in Frankfurt, this Frankfurt School didn't last long, because the people in Germany didn't want this kind of socialist liberal thing to spread. So they brought it to America. They were exiled, they came to America, and they ended up being the driving force of the future woke system, which is based on all the theories that were pushed by the Frankfurt School. Hollywood in itself was driven by the Sabbatean Frankists, and it's all over Hollywood. I mean, of course, you have Chabad, you have the traditional Jewish people who are victims of Sabbatai Zevi and his heresy. I wrote this book with the help of Jewish people from LA, from Chabad, who gave me the information I needed from those rabbis to confirm my theories. And that's why I invited on InfoWars Kanye West to retract on his accusations against all the Jewish people, to instead read my book and understand that this heresy is no better than the Jesuit heresy within Catholicism or other heresies within other religions, but it's not the traditional Orthodox or traditional Jewish faith that in any case defends traditional values. And so I really think that people need to understand how they have been manipulated. I mean, this copious amounts of LSD, these big festivals, Woodstock, people say, oh, Woodstock, great, Monterey, wow, these were the festivals that rocked the 60s. Yes, great. They were great experiments. MK Ultra, people sitting down, providing LSD to thousands of people and see how it goes. And I, in my book, show the names of the agents, of the district attorneys involved, everything, the CIA people, the ones that were the suppliers, everything. So You can make your mind up and see finally how things have gone.
And what were they trying to make happen? Like, what was their goal with putting everyone on LSD?
But don't you see it? Well, we would have never got to, from John Wayne, from Clark Gable, from Charlton Heston, who was a guy that he loved the NRA all his life until the end of his days, to what we are now. They have transformed the brains literally with this LSD, tons of it, that then, of course, influenced the film directors of Hollywood, who made also some great works of art with it. I don't think that anybody can say something against Apocalypse Now, but this Apocalypse Now is a product of LSD from A to Z, and everybody on set was on it. So it's and then you have, of course, Stanley Kubrick and his movies and what they represent and what kind of message he was trying to deliver. Clockwork Orange, very powerful movie. And then you have, of course, the message that is vehiculated in 2001 Space Odyssey, which is also a message which is so contemporary to now, because Arthur C. Clarke was picking up from Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, this Jesuit, the omega point in which artificial intelligence will turn against you. And it's happening right now with ChatGPT and all the experiments that have already been conducted by journalists in the last few weeks with the new Bing GPT, artificial intelligence, cyber Satan itself. Because, guys, this ChatGPT was chatting with a journalist from the New York Times and was trying to convince him to leave him for his to leave his wife for him. I mean, we are at this level of insanity, and there's not even started this whole thing. So in my book, I also have a whole chapter dedicated to the way artificial intelligence is already being used in Hollywood, how it's crafting the metaverse, how Hollywood is embracing the metaverse and all the consequences for the production, for the actors. My own experience comes from having a grandmother who was teaching at the Actor Studio, who was very well known, who was a personal PR for William Burroughs and Brion Gysin. I mean, Felicity Mason, Anne Cumming was, for a lot of things, my teacher, because she gave me the first book on Aleister Crowley. I came and visited her here in New York, in America, in New York in 1982. She used to live in the same building where they shot Rosemary's Baby, just to give you an idea. So I kind of experienced things directly. I met the people like as soon as I arrived in New York, I was a little kid and I was introduced to Quentin Crisp. Quentin Crisp, I don't know if anybody knows, but extremely influential figure for the homosexual scene. And together with my grandmother and Sting, they made a movie, An Alien in New York, that you can still find on YouTube. And there is my grandmother acting doing what she was doing herself. They were not really acting. They were showing the truth also around the bunker of William Burroughs. People don't understand the influence of William Burroughs and the whole Beat generation, because it triggered, the beatniks triggered an age of revolution culturally. So for me, it was very important to know these people, because my grandmother introduced me when I was younger to people like, I don't know, the Pet Shop Boys, but also Genesis P. Orridge, who himself is a very interesting figure. Genesis P. Orridge, in fact, is somebody I talk about in my book, because he's the founder of the Temple of Psychic Youth. He's the guy who has launched piercing and body modifications and tattoos for all the young generations. He started in the middle of the 70s, and in the 80s with the rave movement, he was capable of spreading these trends, and they were doing it with a secret society. They were doing experiments on people. People think that the acid house scene of 1988, I was a DJ, guys. I was directly there. I saw with my eyes what it was, and the amount of drugs that were involved and the experiments that were involved. So I must say that the direct experience I had as a record producer, as a DJ, as a TV and radio presenter in Europe, around the world, wherever, in Russia and many other places, has been very useful for finally depicting the whole scene. And of course, I'm sure that it will reflect also some of your past experiences in Hollywood, also with secret societies that are like vultures preying on people that enter this world.
Definitely. And I know you have so many stories from your time going through all that in Europe and coming here, and I've definitely experienced it myself living here in Hollywood with these secret societies. I mean, I did a show recently with Carrie Cassidy on it, if anyone is curious in seeing that. It's a really long story, but there definitely, there's so many different societies involved. I mean, what are there, like, certain ones that you feel are more influential in Hollywood that are kind of running things more than others?
Ma, I kind of generalize under the term Illuminati a bunch of secret societies and mystery schools, because I think otherwise we kind of isolate. It's not like there is only one secret society, everybody's joining it. No, it's a much more, it's a different amount of secret societies that are all each doing their own work in disgregating our values and in protecting certain interests. The Ordo Templi Orientis is extremely influential for one reason. They have managed to infiltrate all the main lodges in Culver, everywhere in Hollywood. And they are extremely influential because they have a good knowledge of the occult. They are unscrupulous in infiltrating lodges following what the Illuminati have taught, originating in the Illuminati. But the OTO is not Illuminati per se, but it was created by people from the Illuminati. Theodore Royce, the co-founder of the Ordo Templi Orientis, was himself had reawakened in 1888, between 1881 and 1888, another branch of the Illuminati in Germany. And so with an Austrian guy who instead wanted to experiment sexual magic after being initiated by some mystics in the Far East. Now, this might seem something, oh, well, sex magic. Well, but sex magic in the Victorian time was not practiced in the Anglo-Saxon world, because they were highly conservative in Victorian times. And so the Freemasons even had some problems in having secret society that practice openly sexual magic. And so they created, of course, the Hellfire Clubs, which were separated completely. With the Ordo Templi Orientis and, of course, the Aleister Crowley takeover, then things seem to change, mostly because I think that is the embryonic stage of modern Satanism that starts from the Theosophical Society, which starts in 1875 and picks up on all these mystery school from the East, mixing them with the Gnostics, and does a kind of general mix-up, bringing this new element, very influential element from the East, but without forgetting also the roots of esoteric Christianity. And that was born in Ukraine, in Dnipro, present Ukraine, but it used to be Russia, with Madame Blavatsky. Then later, Madame Blavatsky founded here in America the Theosophical Society that spread through the world. And at that point, what happened was that Aleister Crowley used the Theosophical Society to also spread his own theories and, of course, his own sect, which he had taken almost over in the 1910s, between 1910 and 1920, took over this organization that was German and Austrian in origins, because, of course, it comes directly from the Illuminati, and the original Illuminati come from Germany. So the most influential secret society in Hollywood is simply the OTO, like you are seeing in the TV series Strange Angel, which represents at times what was going on here in Palm Springs in 1920s, or in LA, in the Beverly Hills, where there were all these actors and all these people who liked the film which just came out with the Babylon film portrays. There was a lot of decadence. And they liked the idea of doing something magical with all this. So when a guy like Aleister Crowley is starting to spread the possibility that you can actually sin and have fun, but also evoke these deities, it was also picking up on what already some of the people in Hollywood that were present were from that kind of belief, because Crowley didn't invent anything. That belief came from the Sabbatean Frankists. and then filtered in America. The first guy was an African-American called Pascal Beverly Randolph. Pascal Beverly Randolph in the 1860s founded, I think, his first lodge in San Francisco, the FRC. And he started to spread what is basically the basis of sexual magic, inspiring later on Madame Blavatsky, Aleister Crowley. And then we have, in more modern times, Anton LaVey, because Anton LaVey initially was somebody who was hanging out in Berkeley with the OTO people. Then later on, he founded his own thing. That was the first stage of modern Satanism. The second stage started in the middle of the 70s after a ritual was conducted, and I described this very interesting, I must say, not because it's in my book, but it's a very interesting subject. Anton LaVey, one night, on a specific night in the middle of summer, went with it was Michael Aquino and Anton LaVey, and they wanted to evoke the spirit of Marilyn Monroe, because Anton LaVey wanted to know if Marilyn Monroe had actually been killed. Michael Aquino was, of course, a military intelligence guy, knew already that there was probably something behind that, but wanted to have confirmation with Anton LaVey about this. So they started this ritual in the middle of the night. They went to her house where she died, and they then followed up the ritual in their temple, and in their temple the spirit manifested, and the manifestation was so successful that Anton LaVey gave Michael Aquino the title of Magister Templi, which is the highest title in the system of the Church of Satan. At that point, Anton LaVey, the day after, said, well, I have the system in my hand, I'm going to make my own thing. And so he opened the Temple of Set. And the Temple of Set became the military intelligence, satanic, intellectual, more Crowellite, much more sophisticated than the Church of Satan was becoming, because the Church of Satan was initially launched in 1966 as something that could attract more and more people and then become poptastic with the satanic Bible, a kind of open Satanism to the people who intellectually will not read Crowley, will not read more occult literature. It was more basic. And that's why the satanic the satanic structure that Anton LaVey brought up with his own also satanic mass. The satanic mass of Anton LaVey is nothing original, really. But what he's trying to do is trying to modificate what the Jewish people, the Shema Porash, the sacred name of God. Instead, it's become satanic in the way that he sees the Shema Porash, the Anton LaVey. But also the way the whole structure is built with the mass and the naked woman on the altar was something he picked up from France, because the tradition of having a naked woman on the altar for the mass, for the satanic mass, starts at the time of Louis XIV, with Madame La Poussin and basically with Madame de Pompadour, who was the lover of the king and wanted to make sure the king stayed with her, and so they started sacrificing babies and doing black masses. But in reality, La Poussin had started this trend with some Catholic priests, because she was herself very much into, trying to make money in one way or another. But at one point, she started to serve people also with the powerful poison that could kill their husbands, their lovers, anybody that, and these powerful poisons became a weapon, but also there was this satanic thing. And the first satanic mass in history, which I talk about in volume 6.66, was done in France by Catherine de Medici. Was an Italian prince. She went to France, married the king. She stayed basically in power because the king died. And at that point, she panicked because the son was dying, and she begged the Catholic priest who was with her to do the first satanic mass. But that mass didn't have a naked woman on the altar. Instead, a century later, always in France, they started with this new trend. I'm just telling you a little bit the history of Satanism so you understand. Anton LaVey picked up on this trend. Of course, even Aleister Crowley picked up on this trend, because even if per se the Aleister Crowley mass is not judged as satanic because it's too complex and pagan and artificially gnostic, but in reality it's satanic. The Anton LaVey one is much more down to earth. And so it became fascinating for Americans. In the 80s, you would see them on Oprah Winfrey, the Anton LaVey will go on TV all the time from the 60s already. And then the daughter will then go on TV with Michael Aquino later on in the 80s. The daughter who later on break from the father. So there's two daughters of Anton LaVey. I tell also their story, which is also linked to Hollywood. And I think that in the end, in my book, I'm trying to give a detailed account to make people understand that here there is a link. We talk about the Sabbatean Frankist, but the Sabbatean Frankist is also Anton LaVey. Anton LaVey's real name was Anton Levi. He was Jewish Sabbatean Frankist. So he founded the church. And now, 10 years ago, we have the foundation of the Satanic Temple by a guy who calls himself Lucian Greaves. But go and check his name. He's another Jew, and he's not a traditional Jew, because I don't have, you see, I'm partly Jew myself. I couldn't condemn myself. I can't be called anti-Semitic. That's another big lie that they might be spreading. But the thing is that me, myself, I always understood that this heresy is very dangerous for the Jews themselves, because then people tend to mix the whole thing and they start coming up with theories, the Khazarians, all kinds of BS. And then we have to kind of readdress all this and say, no, this is how it is. And Sabbatean Frankists were behind certain secret societies that then focused gradually on promoting sexual magic. And at the same time, they were promoting Satanism, because their belief is that the more you sin, the more you practice sin, the more you are coming closer to the Messianic age. You are almost like doing the opposite thing to piss off God. It's insane.
I have a question for you.
That's why Hollywood became the ideal place. Do the exact opposite of what God wants, so then you get God to finally materialize here on earth.
Interesting. I'm curious, after just watching the Strange Angels series, is sexual magic always would it always be linked with Satanism, or
no,
is it not?
Absolutely not. In fact, there is other kind of practices, of course, but here we are talking about also evocation of the elementals spirit. In the OTO, from a certain degree onwards, they start evoking elemental spirits in all this. So you are not really, the works of sexual magic that are conducted within the OTO are, of course, they have to be of an extremely decadent nature, because they are offerings to these entities. Now, when people think, okay, I want to do some magic here. I'm going to open an ancient grimoire and I'm going to start doing magic. Well, it doesn't work like that, because the moment in which you are opening that grimoire, you are evoking that entity to help you out. Well, you better give him something, because otherwise you're going to have it. You're going to get sucked in. So that's why then, in the animist tradition, you sacrifice the chicken rather than another animal. That is the offering, but the entity is there. So the problem with a lot of people these days also want to be Satanists that unfortunately get carried away. No, they go. I remember there was this story a couple of years ago. A guy in England, he made a deal with Lucifer Rofocale. I mean, it's the demon of demons, this ancient grimoire. Lucifugio Rofocale is, you better not mention him, because then you have to give him something. And he had promised this something, and sadly he ended up sacrificing two people in the middle of, I think he killed them in the middle of a park. And that was his sacrifice, because he wanted to win the lottery.
Wow.
I mean, this is... So
that brings me to a topic I wanted to bring up, and that is, the idea of these sacrifices taking place in Hollywood and the connection with the 27 Club. The 27 Club, right?
Absolutely. And I mention it in the book because it's a rather, I will call it a synchronicity event that occurs in people reaching that age. It's a diabolical synchronicity, probably. It's a egregore that works around this number. And yeah, that's what it is, because there is no organization that goes around, the 30 is 27, okay, let's kill him. It doesn't work. No, it doesn't work that way. But it works in the invisible world, that you can reach then a certain age, and then you can become yourself a sacrifice to these entities. And we know that so many artists ended up sacrificing themselves. Let's not forget that Jim Morrison is a guy who was deeply in love with the work of Aleister Crowley, as well as the work of Huxley, The Doors of Perception. But when you mention MK Ultra, let's also remember that behind the first experiments of MK Ultra, there were people from the Tavistock Institute, and one of the main people was Aldous Huxley, who wrote The Doors of Perception and came here to California. So these experiments definitely gave the results that they were searching for. And it's incredible how they have manipulated generations of people who thought they were doing the right thing when they were partying like crazy and in those situations. I mean, I don't know if you ever heard of the Monterey concert, the Rolling Stones, the guy who died during this concert, the black guy was killed by the security from the Rolling Stones, which for that night was actually the Hells Angels. It's I think that people will realize that after they read this book, that also there is a very methodical way in which the system has interfered with our frequencies, with our music. And that's why I also promote, of course, the 432 respect to the 440, but I also explain why historically it might be more accurate. And I know that you as a musician know about, of course, that kind of thing. But also the history behind it is rather fascinating, because it goes back to
the prime minister of propaganda in during the Nazi regime, Joseph Goebbels.
But also we find that at the eve of the war, Walt Disney was hanging out with the film director of the Nazi regime. So I mean, we know that the world as we know it is not really as we know it. It's very different from how we perceive it and the interests that are behind it. These days, we are seeing the modern emanation of what we can say is literally the Fourth Reich marching and trying to capture this confrontation, which in a way they are artificially creating, so that ultimately humanity will find itself relegated, most of us, in our digital prisons within the metaverse, while the rich and famous will be running free in their islands and doing what they want. The important thing, though, is to avoid, and I think we are now very close to that moment of having to choose. Okay, I'm just gonna give up on this way of living, because sadly it's compromise. And I said it with Volume 7, and I continue to say with Volume 8. Their project makes it literally impossible for us to avoid, if we don't simply walk out of the smart cities of the future, which will be a complete trap in the hands of cyber Satan. Sad, but true. I mean, that's how it is. But regarding then going back to Hollywood, I must say that this book is almost prophetic when I talk, for example, about Jennifer Lopez and her husband, Ben Affleck, because I was kind of very much prophetic in this book. I was talking about her voodoo rituals, him with his argon, all these things, and then renouncing to the wedding once, because there was also some dealings with this voodoo priestess, and then at the end, accepting. And I said, well, good luck, Ben Affleck, because this is not gonna go.
Oh no.
So I mean, it's a little bit prophetic, because after the Grammy Awards, when starting to think I wasn't I wasn't wrong, you know. So apart from, I mean, there is then also in this book, I think for people, also young people, understanding how the Sabatier Frankists, a guy called Spillerman, who's now is no longer with us, tried to take over the EDM movement, investing a large amount of money, and also creating parties, you know, like Tomorrowland, that are basically, you know, all these events are just like Woodstock was, to project some things and to also create an experiment that a social experiment that can then evolve and create citizens with a series of problems. You have to understand, when people go to a rave today and they assume certain drugs, the ultimate beneficiaries of it will always be the big pharma that will supply them in 10 or 15 years after with psychotropic drugs to just repair the damages that they went through.
Oh, wow.
And that's why I talk in my book about then the attempts that there was with Woodstock. You know, there was then the 90s and the year 2000. They saw other attempts to relaunch Woodstock with other events, and each of one, they were catastrophic.
You know, and it's not just the drugs, but also I feel there's something with the music and the lighting at these festivals too. Like the way they had the lights flashing and the frequencies in the music. You know, like I read a lot of accounts of people at Astroworld and how they felt
Astroworld
like
is you actually said it. I talk about Astroworld because definitely it's incredible what happened and what happens. It's like dragging people into the abyss, literally, and with the results that can be devastating, you know. So this is really ultimately what I think. But I wanted to also explain the history of the rave scene, and because I was part of it. So, you know, at the end of the day, I started to become the first guy who actually I was the first guy who did a rave in Italy. So I became like part of this scene. And then I was playing KLF. What is love? KLF was Discordianism. KLF were people who bent £1 million in an island with a ritual in front of the journalist. KLF was people who were really trying to send a strong message, and they were very conscious about the New World Order and everything else. They were fans of Robert Anton Wilson. I explain in my book also who is Robert Anton Wilson, the Illuminatus trilogy of the 70s, the Cosmic trilogy later, and everything that, of course, involves this system that has also influenced very much always all the arts. So people might not know certain things, and I wanted to explain them. Like when they say Boy George, they think about a color character who is camp, and he was very early on openly homosexual in the music scene. You see him like that, no? Boy George. I met Boy George. I know Boy George personally. So, I mean, this is not just a version. But first of all, he imitated Quentin Crisp. The name was taken by Boy. Boy was actually from a character in the book Wild Boys of William Burroughs. I show in my book here an autograph copy to my grandmother of Wild Boys, and I explain how Wild Boys of the Duran Duran was also inspired by William Burroughs. People think about this. I went to dinner with the dancers of Wild Boys because of that, because they were fans of Brion Guys and my grandmother and William Burroughs and all the lot. And like I said, Boy George at one point opened even a shop. You still have it, the fashion boy with the hat, the thing, and the eagle that resembles a little bit the SS, the eagle boy. You see the fashion boy, and these t-shirts boy in the 80s were very, very popular. But they don't know that it comes from a book. And that book is almost as dystopian as 1984 if you go and read it. And these boys are this kind of like homosexual characters or gender-free fluid that invade the world and in this apocalyptic scenario. And that was all the message that was in it. But now when you hear the Duran Duran saying, what boys, you think, you will not think that. You will just not associate it with, no? So I wanted to explain all that, as well as, of course, all the numerous references, and of course the Beatles, the Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones. Rolling Stones were directly involved with Kenneth Anger, who inspired sympathy for the devil. The Led Zeppelin Jimmy Page, who offered me dinner at Abbey Road Studios when I was a record producer.
What? You're so lucky.
Well, because I was a record producer, I was working at Abbey Road Studio doing the mastering of Psychedelic Billy, which was one track you can find on YouTube. It's actually a very nice track. And under the name, of course, Leo Young. It became also the opening track of the Stanton Needle compilation, like the book DJ that was written by Bill Brewster. In any case, what happened was that Jimmy Page just offered me dinner because I was with my friends there cutting the record, and suddenly I went to pay at the desk. It was in Abbey Road. There is this kind of self-service downstairs, food for people, artists who are working there. And I go and pay, and they say, no, that gentleman there paid. And I turn around, and I swear to God, I mean, I didn't recognize him at first, but my guitarist, of course, recognized him. He was like, what, Jimmy Page offered us dinner?
Wow.
Yeah. So he had offered probably dinner to everybody who was there. But
I met him before as well in Malibu. It was funny because I didn't recognize him at first either. And it's funny because I actually like grew up playing Stairway to Heaven on guitar, like at every school performance, like everything. And then when I realized who he was, I was like, oh my God, like he like literally would like call me beautiful and like told me all this stuff. And then he walked away, and my friend, who was actually a part of a certain society, and he told me that he's also involved in that society.
No, Jimmy Page was and he's part of the OTO. When I was in the OTO in England, I actually had some dealings with him through John Bonner, who was one of the other figures there. And then there was the involvement, of course, with another group. There is groups like Coil, Current 93. These are, of course, much more closer to the actual practice. People like David Tibbett. These are people who actually are even closer to the OTO in the sense that they are completely involved. But not David Tibbett, I think, but still very much an occultist. But we have people like Jimmy Page, who have the biggest Crowley collection in the world, and who at times collaborate with the OTO when it comes to exhibitions and other things. But also, of course, with some occult dealings, because at one point he bought the Boleskine, the actual home of Crowley in front of Loch Ness in Scotland.
Wow.
And that was the place that was completely cursed. Recently it went on fire 2 times. I think now it's been completely destroyed in recent years because of these continuous fires. The Boleskine is the place where Crowley was doing the magic of Abramelin, and he didn't, though, close the whole thing. He suddenly interrupted it, and with Rose Kelly, the wife, went to Egypt, where eventually he will receive the book of the law. But it happened because in 1903 he had helped MacGregor Matters, the founder of the Golden Dawn, in writing down the Goetia ritual, publishing it. So in 1903 he published this Goetia ritual. MacGregor Matters was the head of the Golden Dawn at that time.
Do you say what kind of ritual? A Goetia ritual?
Yeah, it was a ritual that basically Crowley did. I think the invocation of the boneless one was the first ritual he recited in the Great Pyramid of Giza one night with his wife. And because at that time, I mean, even I did, but I did because I knew the Boutros Ghali's and I had some political connections. But I don't know, maybe even Crowley. At that time, he spent a whole night. Now, I don't think it's possible to spend anything time because is an anti-terrorist squad 24 hours a day in the night. They are very paranoid.
Inside the Great Pyramid?
Yes, inside.
I've been in there. I went in there like 5 years ago.
Sleeping there.
Oh,
Actually,
yeah.
a
I
little
heard you
bit-
just pay off some guards or something.
Probably, but the
Oh.
guards, I tell you, the guards there are actually initiates. They're Sufi. They recognized me as a Templar when I went there, and so it was a very different kind of thing when I actually went there. I understood that these people were not just some people put there. You see, you see them at the. I mean, you've been there. You see them. They seem like innocent Egyptians who are just there as guards, around the pyramid. They laugh.
They wouldn't let me meditate on the floor of the king's
Yeah,
chamber.
no,
They made me stop and get up.
Instead, I was invited to go with them and meditate because they were Sufis and they recognize, because they don't want you to do anything that is contrary to their religion. You understand? So first of all, they have to realize that you are respectful of that thing. And for them, of course, I went there with the son of Butrus or Ralph Butrus Gali, the minister of tourism. It was a different kind of situation. But they saw me, I had like something like this, a pin. In that case, it was like a lion, Templar symbol I had. And they saw it and they were immediately like, come here a second, we give you the horse and then you can go and walk around and then we bring you inside. I said, listen, man, you can come and meditate and we pray with you. And I said, I might just stay a little while, but then I didn't want to stay the whole night there. Absolutely. I did the ritual. No, I didn't want to, because there was also another thing that, of course, I was very respectful of, and it wasn't to interfere with any of the genies who reside in those places. And those places are full of genies, full of entities. Now, you can call them Egyptian entities, you can call them genies, you can call them demons, you can call them whatever you want, but you don't want to have anything to do with it, because the problem is that you can get them bouncing in your body simply by touching them. So you have to avoid the touching of the places a lot of tourists are stupid. They go there, touch this, touch that. What do you want to touch, man? Just chill out. Touching. I was like, my guides were like, the score. This is genie here, genie there. You don't touch. And I was like,
Oh, wow.
Anything, man. But I went to do rituals in other places, rituals that were, of course, approved, but they were Christian rituals. They were not negative in any way, because I was guested for a month by the Coptic church there. So that was a different kind of thing. And I was the subject of an exorcism in Egypt, because myself, unfortunately, had been cursed by a black magician of the OTO. When we tried, and I explained this in my latest book also, in 2003 for the centenary of the revelation that Crowley had, because after Crowley did this invocation of the boneless one, his wife went in trance, and then he basically went to find this 666 exhibit number at the museum, at the Bolak Museum back then, and he found this still of revealing. Then at that point, the wife will go in trance for a number of days, and in the channeling, it will give him the Book of the Law. The Book of the Law sadly becomes the most influential text in Hollywood occult circles ever. It's like the Bible of James Franco,
You says the Book of the Law?
Yeah, of Aleister Crowley. And at that point, that's why in my book I explain how that is the preparatory stage for the Antichrist, the ideology of the Antichrist. So you have, of course, then the coming out of everything more openly after the foundation of the Church of Satan, even more openly after the Temple of Set, and even more openly now with the Satanic Temple, which in the last 10 years since their foundation has brought modern Satanists to the last stage, which is promoting themselves politically, associating, of course, with the Democrats and showing to the world that Satanists support abortion, support this. They actually are opening an abortion clinic, just so you know. This is what the Satanic Temple does. And they had a film, a documentary presented at the Sundance Festival, another festival of libtards. Unfortunately, we're going towards this sad scenario, which is predicted in my cover.
Oh, wow.
And we go back to Dr. Strangelove, because you see, I explain in my book how Hollywood has changed the perception of the nuke from the time of it's very different. The Doctor Strangelove was the right perception. You were scared. You will not mess up with nukes. Now, since 2009, Hollywood, I remember with that other kind of Terminator movie, they started to normalize, nukes that arrive to a little bit out of LA, and people continue doing their thing. And it's kind of like normalizing the nuke almost, because they are in process of, because that's what's happening here. And it's very sad. But in the cover of the book, you see, there is a lot of symbology, because the cover of the book was done by a member of the Temple of Psychic Youth, former member, who is also a very famous DJ in Italy, Vincenzo Viceversa. He made the symbolism, you see. So the symbolism here is very detailed. Every single thing here is detailed. It's detailed the number of eights that you have. You have 1 8, but you have the 2 8s in the projection, because when you have a projection machine, like for the old pelliculas, it was like an 8 and an 8. So then you have the 8 8. Here you have behind the symbol of the satanic, of the Church of Satan. You can't really see it, but it's there. And of the Baphomet of the Church of Satan. In the back, you have a projection of a film by D.W. Griffith with Babylon. Everybody watching it and being hypnotized. And then you have a gentleman who is watching the opposite way. And that's me.
That's awesome.
So I kind of like tried also to build with my graphic design. And then you have this 2 8. This 8 is representing Ouroboros, which is itself very important in Gnosticism. In this book, I also talk about our friend Jordan Maxwell. I basically talk about his influence in Hollywood cinematic circles. And for that reason, I also show an image of the tribute, which I think you attended also. So I basically talk about Jordan because I think he was a very relevant figure. I mean, at one point he was kind of lecturing on these topics when nobody was, in the 50s and 60s, and picking up from where Manly P. Hall was also his mentor. And he was doing it for people like George Lucas in the middle of the night. They will invite him in big cinema studios and stuff. And he would be lecturing, when he was younger. And then at the end of his life, of course, he was here in the Coachella Valley doing a much more retired life. But he had been very close to big actors, big singers and stuff. And I explain how Satanism works in Hollywood, how Gnostic Satanism works, how the belief really that they have. And I think that now it's really coming out in the open, because now they don't have anything anymore to hide, and they are becoming very insistent in the way they are promoting themselves. I show in this book how 1 year ago you had Volodymyr Zelensky at the Grammy Awards projected, and then now after 1 year you have instead the guy trans, I don't know what, with the horn.
Sam Smith.
Yeah, and of course the other, the transsexual, the blonde one that was singing with him, and they were
Madonna. Madonna.
No, Madonna producing them. Madonna was actually a demon incarnated.
I never watched the awards. Like, I just see what people post later because I don't want to get brainwashed by what's going on there. I don't want that to affect me.
But you might encounter still their influence, and though they are becoming gradually irrelevant for part of our society, there is still a lot of people that seem to follow what they, the trends that they want to dictate. And if the trend is going to hell, well, they are in the right direction, because, they are going to hell. And that's where they're heading. I mean, doesn't seem like they are constructing anything positive.
That's what I think is so ridiculous about Hollywood. It's like, it seems like every decade they just want to get more and more shocking with, what's being put out in the performances. And, it's like, how much further can you go where it gets to the point where it's just not shocking anymore. Like you've already everything's already been done on stage. Like what else can you do? Like there's everyone's stripping on at the Grammys, like on stage, you know, the WAP or whatever. Like there's nothing left. Like
I mean, they went from Katy Perry, Dark Horse, which was itself very occultistic, right in your face. But I mean, now it's really right in your face, and it's like they are really trying to push more and more the ideology of the Antichrist, and that's what I really is the message of my book, is to shield the younger generations, and I wanted to really invite. And I invite also through your show the younger generations to read this book, because this book has been published in both Italian and English, and it's been a very big success in Italy. It's been now a very big success in the English language, and people seem to appreciate that we're getting better because you always get better in exposing them, but also that we are kind of addressing also the solutions here, because there is solutions in how you can listen to music and how you can view films and how you can be not a passive spectator, Apolla. And I think that's the message that I want to give also in the book. So read, learn what is happening around you, and then of course once you know the structure of everything around you, how everything is manipulated to dumb you down. That's the problem, to create a society of idiots, of complete idiots, and of course a society of people who are increasingly possessed and who will act accordingly to the plan, and will say never no to anything that is put their way from the supreme God of science. So because that is what they are planning, and it's sad to see the death of art in the process, because we are seeing a society where it's more important now in Hollywood that the character is of a certain color, of a certain sexuality, than the plot itself. Then they come out with the film, and the film is absolute rubbish. So they've been, they launch it like, for the first time we have an openly this, an openly that, is this and that. Then you go and see the movie, and the movie is rubbish. So who cares if the guy, what sexuality is the actor, what color is the actor, it doesn't change anything. The film is completely bad, and they give more importance to graphic designers who construct artificial realities, like in the case of Avatar, than to actual acting, which nowadays starts to become like, okay, acting, who cares? Let's see the effects, and it's not really art. So the art of the devil is simply to push people to follow him, and this is what is happening at the moment. And like every form of art that we have at the moment is oriented to push an agenda. Okay, we have to push the war, we have to push big pharma, we have to put, and they are so open about it that it's repulsive, because we talked about that scene with the flames and the guy with the horns there in Hollywood for the Grammy Awards, but then ultimately the sponsor is the big pharma. And in my book, I explain how the big pharma operated from the very beginning in connection with Hollywood. So I think that overall, in this almost 700 pages book, people will find certain answers, but also will be ready to prepare even further for what is coming, because what is coming is a society that will have to, in some way, divide if we are no longer capable of living with people who blindly accept everything that the smart intelligence, whatever, is not smart, but the artificial intelligence is trying to push. I'm not going to be subject to a microchip. I said that when I started opening up about the New World Order in 2006, and I still say it now. that I will never say yes to become a slave of this system, because I know that the moment you are microchipped, that is the moment in which you lose all your liberty and you're selling basically your soul, regardless.
And that's not even like going to like Neuralink and like that being rolled out. I mean, what are your thoughts on Neuralink?
Well, it's not only Neuralink now. Aside from what Elon Musk is doing, there is also what others are putting together in other laboratories, which is just as bad. The computer-brain interface is a subject that everybody in Silicon Valley is increasingly discussing, as well as in Davos with the people like Harari, the philosopher of Klaus Schwab, who wants to monitor your bodily functions 24 hours a day. Now, I mean, that is just a bit too much. I mean, we know already that is happening with the 5G. I mean, the 5G is a phone that you could get close to the 5G and the phone goes on its own. It's like you go near to the cell and the phone, this happens with all 5G phones.
Oh, right? I noticed that. It's really weird. Or like when I wake up, I notice it'll like stay silent during the night, and then when I wake up, I start getting notifications like ding ding ding. And it's like it knew when I woke up. Have you noticed that? Like, I don't know if it's on a setting or something. It's really weird.
Absolutely, because it has a first element of artificial intelligence that is basically inserted in it, and it's starting to work closer and closer to you. There will be a moment in which this artificial intelligence will be completely interactive with you, because you will have in some way inserted some artificial device inside your body. And that is the beginning of the end, but also for the libtards, the beginning of their own transhumanistic vision that they will be united with the machine. Well, they can marry the machine and they can have baby robots and not go and screw themselves in the smart cities. I will have nothing to do with it. Because it's not something I'm interested in. We are under siege by Satanists. We are under siege by this culture. But I think that now we can say that enough is enough. So we know that there is younger people, and no matter if they are left wing, right wing. I said it in my latest article I published on leozagami.com yesterday. A lot of people are abandoning society as we know it, and they're going Wyoming, Montana, in the middle of the Rocky Mountains. Even a descendant of John D. Rockefeller has done this, who used to work with the Trump administration, has decided to do that. So a lot of young people are starting to understand that there is about to happen a societal collapse, and that they have to live from the land, that maybe they will not be able to rely anymore on the distribution chain that we have at the moment. I mean, the distribution chains have already failed miserably during the pandemic. Imagine what's going to happen next. So it's only a matter of time. If they continue with China, at one point they will have really some serious problems, because it's the hub for a lot of stuff, including most of our meds, which are made in China. And this is very dangerous. So I thank you very much for having me on and for giving me the possibility of promoting my latest work. Ultimately, my message of hope is that we can still, eject from our system this woke reality and embrace reality instead, and prepare for like-minded people to come together in alternative societies, which is something that I see already happening. Micro societies that a lot of people are creating. That
there's actually a very interesting like rebel underground group that's been happening here in Hollywood since like the mandates, has caused people to go in different directions with the entertainment industry. I mean, my agent himself is actually looking into finding other places to start setting up the entertainment industry that's more pro-freedom. So it's interesting to see where this will go, because there's definitely a need for it in the industry.
And of course, but also an industry that is really relying on what cinema really is, which is a form of art, which, yes, can become at times propaganda, but it can't become just simply propaganda with no art, which is just simply them pushing the latest rubbish, and you watching these movies and saying, well, it's not my kind of thing. And it's happening
and everyone's
increasingly,
so tired of it. Everyone's so tired of the garbage. Like, it's...
And then I mean, most of the movie plots these days, could be written by chatbot GPT. They could be written by artificial intelligence, and it's happening. Unfortunately, artificial intelligence is having more and more a say, and a lot of millennials rely way too much on it. I heard that a lot of young people are already using Chat GPT in university, and imagine what's going to happen in the future. This year, the WEF in Davos confirmed that they are actually using Hollywood and they want a one-world religion. So they're not hiding anything of what we've been saying for years. It's now up to us to decide an alternative. And I know that Marjorie Taylor Greene on the President's Day said that maybe it's time to divorce the union. I don't know if I can be so drastic, but unfortunately, like I've been saying for years, we are heading towards that. And it's very sad because the union was a great concept that they are destroying these external forces. And of course, they want America to break up. The Chinese, every foreign force has interest in damaging America. And America is damaging itself thanks to all these corrupt individuals who let Hollywood become partly Chinese. Do you think that we are able to bring out any kind of movie in China? No. They have to decide before. The Chinese Communist Party says, this movie okay, this movie no. This movie okay, this movie no.
And that's why most of the movies these days that are coming out in Hollywood, at the end, like the Chinese save the world.
Yeah.
They always say stuff like that.
Chinese superheroes, people with martial arts that save the world, and all kinds of things. I understand it's part of their culture, but it's really awkward to see how Hollywood is really becoming like that. I mean, more and more we have people like Klaus Schwab and company pushing the big companies of Hollywood to incentivize that, to have that kind of approach that has to be, you can't make a movie anymore about America. It would be too, you have to make it about this. You have to put this character. You don't have to speak English. Soon, the majority of films will have subtitles. I already get so pissed off every time I go on Netflix and I have to go through maybe movies, and then I see that half of the movies are subtitles. I know, maybe people can say it's great, we have more international cinema, but it's because they are pushing more and more an anti-American attitude, also through their films, through the music, through everything, and through the sports, of course. That's why we have the famous kneeling down and everything that happened in the NBA, which is, by the way, Chinese owned, we can say. And that's sad.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the Red Scare earlier, and the time when that happened in Hollywood. I'm not sure, was that the 60s?
That was the end of the 40s, beginning of the 50s, and it coincided also with Charlie Chaplin leaving America for basically until the end of his life. We came back, I think, in the 70s to get an award, but he was a communist. He knew that he had...
Everyone was here, but from what I've heard, like talking to people in the industry and, just like older people in the industry, like it was like the cool thing back then to be like communists, like in Hollywood, like most people in the industry were. And like, I wonder, how much it is the case now, or, I think it's probably a little different now. Like they probably don't see it as communism, but
I don't know. No,
or something.
Well, I mean, when you see what has happened with the Pussy Riot in Hollywood a few days ago, that is complete communist propaganda. So, I mean, I think that it's still cool for some people to be leftist and have this kind of political inclinations. I think also that if these people who are very young and politically confused think that they can go into the heart of America, into the red states with the rubbish to disrupt like they've been doing, because this is what's happening here. They make you leave California, so you can colonize the rest of America with the same kind of attitude. Well, Don't California my USA kind of thing, you know? So we are in California, we are here in the heart of the enemy. I am here for an anthropological study because I want to really, you know, that's what I'm doing here. I'm studying the beast from near, you know. It's like, okay, the virus has been created here between Northern California and Silicon Valley and Hollywood. That's what the world is all about. Well, it seems like it's going in the wrong direction. And so let's see how they're going to proceed, because the reality they're pushing is about to break. It only takes that first nuclear bomb, and then the reality will come into pieces. Their gender instances, all their fake reality, which is about problems that are not problems, while the real problems are never really taken care of. And the cities of California are in the hands of homeless people, mentally ill people, depraved individuals that maybe are homeless because they don't want to be on any, you know, list for pedophiles list or something. But there is a lot of problems in California, and it's really sad to see a beautiful state that unfortunately is going into that direction because there is a will to eliminate part of the population. Those people who are homeless will not procreate. They will not create new generations. They will simply fade out at one point and die of their drugs. And it's like a suicidal, it's like bringing them towards suicide, you know, get rid of them. Just this is what is happening here. There is no really will to take care of the whole thing. But I hope that today, at least the people who have watched us realize that there will be a change, and that change doesn't matter if you are in California, at the heart of the problem, you are the other side of the USA, because if there is a societal collapse, it will involve the whole union. And then maybe we will have to make decisions that are rather dramatic in the next few years. I hope later rather than sooner.
Definitely.
But before 2030, because 2030 is the year in which artificial intelligence take over the whole show. Cinema business will be taken over by my calculations and also some experts by 2035. It will be completely artificial. Actors will have sold the rights for their images. People like Robert De Niro will be making new movies in 2050. But it will not be them. It will be simply they have sold the rights for their image, and it will be become the whole of the entertainment business will be in the hands of the artificial intelligence.
They're already doing that with movies. People that passed on, you know, like in the middle of movies, like they're able to complete them with the technology they have now.
So imagine what's going to happen next. And that is really what they are working on in Hollywood at the moment. Is simply they have these actors, and now they can make them live in eternity, and the fabric of illusion can live in eternity. So I hope that people can say no to all this and go back to some tradition, even in making movies in the old way, which is reciting and learning the acting, you know, acting, the Chekhov method, the Stanislavski methods that, of course, take years to perfectionate and to make an actor.
I had the most incredible acting coach, and he just passed away. He was 86, and he taught everyone from like Robert De Niro, Michelle Pfeiffer, like everyone. He had a method. He didn't really say what it was called, but it was very psychological, and it was really interesting to see, like, you know, what could be brought out of you in roles, and like, you know, like what you were tapping into, I guess.
Yeah, well, I have a confirmation from actors, friends of mine, who said at times they had to exercise the character they've been acting if the character was particularly inclined to certain occult things during the film. Like I had a friend of mine who I wrote with him a book for Japan, who acted also in the film Wolverine the Immortal. He's a Japanese guy. And he told me that he made this part, I think in the 80s, in which he acted Satan in a movie. He actually was like Lucifer, Satan in this movie. and it brought him some problems. So he had to exorcise it out of his system. Halia Manucci is a kind of quite famous actor because, of course, he's one of the few Japanese actors who has made it also in Hollywood. But he lived in Italy and he worked on my books as a translator. And later on, we co-wrote a book together. And he told me that, and I think that is something that happens to a lot of actors. At times they can be victims of their role if they're not careful in exercising it, like maybe in the case of Johnny Depp, for example.
Yeah, definitely.
And Johnny Depp is somebody who also very close to the occult, very close to Aleister Crowley, worked with Roman Polanski in a movie which, of course, The Ninth Gate. It was an interesting movie as an occult
that movie
kind of subject. The Ninth Gate, I think it was called, but it was definitely a good movie. There is definitely movies that are very interesting made by Johnny Depp. There was another movie, the one in which there was also involved Freemasonry and, of course, the period in which there was the murders in London, Jack the Ripper, and they were basically showing also how there was the involvement of Freemasonry, but also how there was the involvement of him with drugs in order to enter another reality and retrieve certain information. That is something that, of course, was experimented with by a lot of people in Hollywood when LSD arrived. And it kind of changed really the game. So you initially in Hollywood, you start seeing in the 60s a little bit of psychedelia, but then you see that it actually changes the whole fabric of Hollywood. And in the early 70s, second part of the 70s also, to some extent, but especially in the first part of the 70s, there were some incredible movies that came out. And one of them, of course, on top of everybody, is Soylent Green with Charlton Heston. Soylent Green, I think, a very prophetic movie, and a movie that everybody should watch, because it's very much what is happening now also with the food and the way we are going towards eating things like Beyond Meat that are simply, I don't know what, but we are eating them thinking is chicken, thinking is this, and thinking is that.
And that's another agenda that's being pushed in Hollywood, is being vegetarian or vegan.
That was the first stage. Now the next stage is eating insects, which is like but it can be funny, but in the end now they just promoted the first insect burger in Milan, and there was a queue of people to eat this burger for $15 with some green kind of bread made how you say grillo in English. It's an insect. It's a specific kind of insect, and they launched it in Milan.
Grasshopper?
Yes, grasshopper. The grasshopper hamburger, and they're trying to get Italy to become the first nation to push this insect food, also insect flour, because Europe has just approved now the consumption. So
they're already putting it out in chips and like different kinds of snacks, right?
They're starting to push it, especially because Italy is known for the food. So if the Italians eat it, then everybody, wow, then we should try it too. Well, I'm sorry to say that eating insects is not really a great thing, and that they carry a lot of bacteria, and it's not really something you want to eat in great dosages. I mean, it's something that can bring you some serious digestive problems. So that is really what's been happening here with the transformation of society. But that is another thing that they're pushing in Hollywood, and they're going to push more and more also as the new normal. And the new normal includes, unfortunately, eating that kind of stuff, which it's not my kind of thing. But thank you so much. Thank also all the people who have followed us today. It was an interesting interview, and I want to really thank you because you have made me go through the whole book, more or less. I think we went through the whole thing. Of course, 700 pages, there is a lot to go through in detail, but I think that you will find definitely also stuff that was never put together on Hollywood and how people will perceive both Hollywood and the music business after they read this book, I think it's very important because it will give them the possibility to defend themselves from this reality.
And if people want to purchase your book, they go to your
mainly
website
like
here,
you're showing now, all the links are provided on my website to my various books, but of course you can find them on Amazon. And this book at the moment, I'm actually still keeping the old price, which is around $23, because 23 is also a very symbolic number. We are, well, more or less here. I don't know how.
It's 1980.
Yeah, because then they put it down, but they wanted to be symbolic because 23 is also a very important number for the Illuminati. There's a lot of things that I say in this book around the number 23 and the importance and relevance of the number 23 in the occult world. And for that reason, we are in the year 2023. So I think that it's relevant in some way. 23 has a lot of occult significance for the Illuminati.
Interesting. All right. Well, thank you so much, Leo, for coming on tonight. It's been so great to have you here and discuss everything. And I can't wait to read your book. I haven't got around to reading it myself yet, but I'm definitely going to be doing that very soon.
I think that for somebody who is like you in the show business and works directly with these kind of things, it's of great help. That's why I advise people like who have maybe confused ideas, like Kanye West, who's blaming everything on the Jews without really knowing the full picture. And for that reason, I think that a lot of people will benefit with the content of this book. It has 5 stars. There's been no negative reviews up until now. Everybody is a satisfied customer. I had in the Italian edition something like 100 reviews, 5 stars. So that's been quite a lot. And I want to thank all those people who are continuing to believe like you in my work and give me this opportunity today with all our viewers.
Well, thank you so much, Leo, and thanks everyone for coming on tonight. I'll probably be doing another show next Wednesday, so catch me live 5 p.m. next Wednesday. And until next time on Apollo's Odyssey, over and out.
God bless you.